what made you interested in becoming vegan or plant-based?
Yeah, so it kind of goes back a really long time. My older sister was a vegetarian since I was a child. Like, I think since she was probably like 9 or 10, she hated the texture of meat or the idea of eating animals. And that was back in like the 90s when it was like, okay, so she's just going to eat a portobello mushroom and some
Yeah.
beans. Like that was like that was the extent of that was her diet for protein. And even though mushrooms have like very little protein. So I was always around it. Mel, she's my older sister. She's been a vegetarian since then, gone vegan, vegetarian, back and forth. And so it's something that was not very taboo. But my dad is like a hunter, very opposite, like very into meat. So he's a like has like a side barbecue hustle business. So like ribs were very big, like very much so a staple. So I kind of just was like in between both. And um ethically, I always felt like very confused about like having pets, but then eating meat. So I just felt like very like confused by it. And then, little things started to happen, like global warming or climate change started to get like more predominant. Like, here's some things that you can do to feel like you're in control, and plant-based is one of them. And then I watched a video. This is going to sound silly, but I watched a video of a cow playing soccer. And I just looked at my wife and I was like, I can't eat meat anymore. And she was like, that was it. That because I had tried vegan before, I tried vegetarian before. And she was like, that was it. And I was like, I don't know what it was about that, but that was like the factor. So then from then on, I stopped eating red meat, but I would eat chicken and eggs and stuff because the last few times I did it really abruptly. And being ADHD, I've learned that if I do something abruptly, if I don't do the core habits, I'm going to mess up. So I started really small, and it was literally right when COVID started. And I think I was going into control what you can control. And so then I slowly went no chicken, only fish, no dairy, all of the layers really, really slowly, about 6 months. And then by then going vegan was exceptionally easy because I had done really, really slow. About once a month, I took something out. And also nowadays, vegan's like so much easier to be,
Oh yeah.
than back in the 90s. So yeah.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah. It's a similar thing for me. I can't remember the exact moment like you can with the cow video. But I
Yeah.
remember like I've had quite a few people in my life who are vegetarian or vegan, and
Mhm.
they would show me these videos, and I had this sort of cognitive dissonance about it because I was like, oh, I need meat for protein, right?
Right. Yeah.
But I love animals, and just like watching some of these documentaries, nothing like too graphic like PETA, I couldn't have handled
Yeah.
at the time.
Yeah.
Still can't. But I would just watch it and I'd be like, this is really what I feel resonates with me. But
Yeah.
just I'm so stuck in my pattern or my habits, and this is what I
Mhm.
know. So honestly, I feel like after my separation, and I kind of was going through a lot at the time, I was going through bottom surgery too. I was like, man, this is time to change. Like, I'm going
Yeah.
to change this. And yeah, I was vegetarian for a while. And then I would say to this day, I don't like to say I'm 100% vegan
Hmm.
because, as you know, it can be hard. Like, I'll eat a bagel. Sometimes it might have milk products in it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Hmm.
Try not to get too fixated on the little things, but I just try to like see, this is the best that I can do with my
Yeah.
capacity in the world that
Yeah.
we live in.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, I think for me, what I've had to do is learn the kind of like what you just said, the balance of like what's important, what's not. Like if my mom messes up and buys something that because she tries to buy vegan stuff, but she buys something that has milk product in it. And I'm like, it's small enough, it's not going to tear my stomach up. And my mom was trying. Like, am I really going to just like be like, oh, I can't eat dinner now because I'm at my mom's house and she met, like, no, like she tried, the effort was made, and I'm here now. Like that's where, and I don't want to make my mom feel less than just because she didn't know how to like now she's like, okay, I looked at the ingredients and like she tries. But like you said, it's like controlling what we can, and also I think the rigidity, I don't know the right word, but
Rigidity. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
is sometimes what actually hurts the vegan community, because it makes people feel like it is all or nothing. Like sometimes I'll do honey. We're in the Pacific Northwest, and there's a lot of local like beef farms. I don't know what they're called.
Yep.
And I do want to support those because right now we need bees. So there's like certain times where I'm like, if I'm at the farmer's market and I can help support a local thing, then I will. But it's not like I'm going out there wanting to, you know, mess up the rules. But I'm just trying to do what I can with what
Yeah,
I can. It's a tough one.
for sure. I feel
I,
like with honey too, I've never actually researched it or looked into it, but I don't even know how it's harmful. I feel like it's just because it's an animal
I think
byproduct.
it's an animal byproduct. They just jump on it.
But I agree
Yeah.
with you. Like, I will definitely have honey.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
I think more of it as, in the big scheme of things, what can I do that aligns with my moral compass? About like 4.5 years ago, I had this like huge mental breakdown, and I can't believe this is the first time we're like actually talking, but I've followed you for a really long time, and I know when you went through the separation and you were doing the bodybuilding and everything, it was like watching an old friend rediscover themselves. And it was a lot of like when I had my mental breakdown and was rebuilding, and I was looking at like what it is masculinity, like what is like, why am I working out all the time, or why am I eating meat or having my whiskey, like all of these things that I look at and I'm like, is that me, or is that like super toxic masculinity that I thought I was trying to achieve? And then the moment I stepped back and I was like, actually the kind of man I am is like in love with animals and wants to be vegan and doesn't need alcohol to be happy. I can have an edible before I go to bed and be just as relaxed or whatever. I was able to reevaluate, and it's a bummer. It comes at like such a struggle, like such a hard moment in our lives, or moments. But I know for me, that was like a huge growing moment. The last 4 years, I've really actually figured out the kind of man I am. And it had a lot less to do with all of those like stereotypes. And so I think like when people are like, oh, that's not vegan because of this, or that's not manly because of this, I'm like, oh, maybe for you. But
Yeah.
for me, I'm doing the best I can as the vegan, or as a man, or as a husband, or as a dad, or whatever, or even as like a fitness,
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I feel like it's a lot of unlearning almost instead of learning.
Yeah.
Like you're
Yeah.
almost like brainwashed to live a certain way. I relate to that 100%. And it's just like, figuring out who you are beneath all of these layers of what you think you are and what society tells you you should be.
100%.
And I think, yeah, even with veganism, we have to question like, why is there so much pressure to be a
Yeah,
specific way when people are making like a huge effort? That's what matters. If most
for
people did
sure.
that,
Yeah.
it would make a big change.
Oh, yeah. And I think if you shamed them less, like I have people who, I follow a few vegan accounts, and, it'll be like KFC's got the new vegan chicken wings or whatever they are, chicken nuggets. And people are like, well, they're still fried in the same oil, so I'm not going to support that. And then other people are like, I just want companies to know that they need to do that, so I'm going to buy them. And both sides are just, they're trying so hard to figure it out. But often this side where they're like, well, I won't do it. And it's like, okay, fine, but don't shame other people for trying to figure out what works for them.
Yeah.
They're just trying to figure out. And as a dad, there's times where it's like, I'm exhausted, I'm tired, I'm gonna stop off at Carl's Jr. or whatever you have up there and get a vegan burger. Like I'll, no mayo, no cheese or whatever, but I'm still gonna do it. And I get that it's grilled on the same thing with the burgers that my kids are getting, but that's the best I can do, and I'm exhausted right now. So
Yeah.
please don't make me feel shame for just trying to do the best I can.
Yeah. 100%. I wanted to actually ask you about what it's like to be a dad, if you don't mind. I would love to be a dad in the future, and I feel like it's a really important thing to talk about, especially like being in the trans community.
Yeah, it's pretty dang incredible. It's the hardest job I've ever had. I have a lot more empathy for people who don't want kids, because now I get what they're passing up is awesome. Like get sleep, get rest. A lot of times people shame people for not wanting kids. And Courtney and I work really hard to support our friends who don't want kids, because it's a lot harder than we realized it would be. but at the exact same time, I'm getting to a lot of what you just said, the unlearning. I'm working really hard so my kids don't have to unlearn stuff in the first place. And having two daughters, they are rock stars and they're super strong. You know, an example, we just started our daughter in gymnastics. She really wanted to do gymnastics, and there's these two kids in there. And I mean, I don't know their gender, but I'm assuming they're boys. And they kept cutting her off. They were very dominant. And I was so proud because I'm watching my daughter and she looked around like they just cut me off. And she was like irritated. And so then they took a turn, like they're walking in a corner, and she just walked across the corner to cut right back in front of them.
Good for
And
her.
I was like, I was so proud. She just was like, no, she just looked at them, and she was like easily like 5 or 6 inches shorter than them.
Yeah.
And she just was like, no, like you don't get to do that. And I was like,
Okay.
that's my kid.
That's awesome.
You know, so I think being a dad, there's so much I did not realize of unspoken, like I knew there was sexism, obviously, with dads versus moms, but I had no idea how much work moms put in. And so it's been really, I've had to be really intentional, even with the sexism I know about and the habits Courtney and I try to do of sharing patterns and everything. I still can see like when she carries more and having to be like, hey, let's check in. Let's, you know, look at the habits. Let's look at what you're doing, you know, and she's a stay-at-home mom right now. And so like, obviously there's some extra work there, but, yeah, I think like that's what's so interesting is even when, you know, as a trans individual, we know all the sexism, we know all this stuff. This society still, you know, people still buy my kids pink dolls consistently for their birthday, you know, and they still say good girl or whatever, even when we've told them like we don't say good girl or bad or whatever, like we want them to just know they're strong and badass. And so I think when you are trying to parent, the way Courtney and I say it is we try to parent emotional intelligence as like the main factor. You still are fighting against a lot of society. And so you really have to be intentional about your why. Like, why did you have kids? What's your goal? If it's just to have many versions of you, don't do it. But if your goal is to bring in a kinder version of society, people who can cope with their feelings so that they can, you know, be active participants in the community. Like if that's your goal, that's awesome. Go for it and parent that way, but don't do it in a way where you're just like going with the flow, because society will parent your kids if you don't.
Yeah.
And so that's I think been like the hardest part is like just always being on, because we're really wanting to be intentional. Like we created these little people and they're going to have to go out into the world someday. So like, how do we parent them in a way where they are strong, independent people, specifically strong, independent women until they tell us otherwise. You know, and I think like that's another factor is like we've tried to explain that daddy's trans and it's just like they kind of get it. Addie kind of gets it out of nowhere. She'll like, for a while I told her that like when daddy was a little boy, people thought he was like a little girl and they didn't understand that like daddy was born in the wrong body and all this stuff, and like just totally went over her head. And like 2 weeks later, out of nowhere, my father-in-law's over and she's like, did you know daddy was a little girl, or people thought he was? Were you a little girl too? And oh my gosh, he was so uncomfortable. And he's nice. He's a great guy. He's super supportive, but still struggles with some like blatant things like right in his face like that. And so kids are funny because they don't get it, but they get it.
Yeah.
You know, so that was pretty funny. She does stuff like that, you know. But
I was wondering how that conversation would go for sure.
Yeah.
Like, something I could think about in the future, but I agree with everything you said. I think that was like so wise. Like you really have to be careful about why you're having children. I think a lot of people, especially like cisgender people,
oh, absolutely,
in like heterosexual, you know, people, you know, they will accidentally have children. Sometimes they don't even want to have kids. So there's a lot of that, like people, you know, they choose to have kids for the wrong reasons, and it creates more trauma and just.
Oh yeah.
I totally support it when people don't want to have kids, because I'm like that's really brave, actually.
Yeah,
it's looked down
Absolutely.
upon for like, I
Yeah.
think that's super unfair.
Yeah. No, I think that the way that we have this like expectation for people, they're supposed to get married, they're supposed to have kids, and I just thought, yeah, I stay single, travel, have fun. Let us with the kids like have to stay home and do that stuff. But like if you want to stay single and travel, like find that empowerment. If you want to get married but not have kids, or if you just want to stay, you know, in a relationship without being married, like there's so many levels of living that um are none of our business. You know, it's just like
Yeah,
do what you want to do.
do
And
you?
yeah, exactly. And I think oh, I had a thought and I totally forgot it.
That's okay. Happens
Anyways,
to me all the
it
time.
happens. But you know, I think that with kids, you have to be, I think that's what I was going to say is the why I think is super important in a lot of ways. And we don't talk about that factor of like, why do we get married? Why are we picking the job we have? Why do we eat the food like vegan, you know, or whatever? You know, I think that oftentimes we don't sit down and think about the why, and life is going to happen either way. And if you don't have a why, you're just going to go with the flow. And when things are hard, you know, it forces you into things that you may or may not want to do, or habits that you don't love. And parenting is the exact same way. If you don't have an anchor of why you're parenting that way, and not a curriculum, but a foundation, you will just get swept up with it. And so I think that that is one of the main factors, I think, for people is if they're wanting to become parents. Oh, and that's what I was going to say is oftentimes people will say, you know, the trans guys will reach out to me because they often will ask how we became parents.
Mhm.
And they'll just, you know, they'll talk about like how it's very triggering that they can't have kids. And I'll say there's two factors. One, plenty of cis guys have reached out to me about having kids that trans guys don't realize how many cis guys can't
Yeah,
procreate.
yeah.
But two, what a gift it is that we get to be intentional about creating life.
Mhm.
And they always think like that's such a weird thing. And I'll say like Courtney and I had to be very intentional. Addie was brought here with a purpose. You know, Ellie was brought here with a purpose. And we had to sit down and plan it out. And sure, it wasn't free, but a lot of things that come free later in life come with a price. And so we were intentional about it. And when we were talking about having Addie and if we were going to do that or not, and going to those doctor appointments, we had to also talk about how we wanted to parent, what type of year we wanted her to be born, you know, the fun parts, the hard parts, all of it. And so there's a lot of things that people look at being trans as a trigger or as a negative. And I think it's pretty dang cool.